We are live. Welcome everyone to another Twitter live session with us here at Arcana, where we are talking about a lot of different things, but generally focused around user experience in the space. Today it's just going to be again purely all around chain abstraction. And to help us talk about this, we have some wonderful people from the ecosystem here. We have Tabasco Ethan here from Particle Network. Hi, Ethan. Uh,
Good morning.
Very great to have you here. We have Max from Everclear.
Jam, how's it going?
And we have Euclid from One Balance.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So I think we'll just get started with some of the basic stuff. I think almost everyone knows what your companies are and what it is that they do. At least the ones who are tuning in with interest in this on this particular subject. Your reputations precede you, but I think it would be great if you guys can give your personal introductions. What is it that you guys do specifically at your respective companies? And also, if it would be great if you can just perhaps accompany that introduction with one differentiator of your company within the chain abstraction space in general. So maybe Euclid, we'll start with you.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Euclid here, leading BD and partnerships at One Balance. And One Balance sees a problem with chain and liquidity fragmentation across the whole ecosystem. And we aim to simplify this by, hence the name, having one balance, where users can simply have one balance, regardless of where it is in the ecosystem, and utilize it anywhere else, regardless of what chain it is.
Great. What's that one differentiator that you guys bring to the table?
So the biggest benefit that we have is we actually aim to work with quite a lot of different chain abstraction protocols. Rather than being seen as a competitor, we actually work hand in hand upstream to the wallets and downstream towards like the solver networks. Hence, we work quite closely with Max, Everclear.
Fantastic. Yeah, Max, why don't you go next? Quick introduction about yourself and what's the one differentiator Everclear brings.
Yeah, with pleasure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the intro. My name is Max. I'm the ecosystem lead at Everclear. Everclear it's been a company that's been around for a while, since 2018 actually, under a different name before. We used to be called Connext. So the majority of people know us for our bridging tools and our cross-chain capabilities. But Everclear really focuses on something different. We define ourselves as the first clearing layer uh, that helps to coordinate the settlement of liquidity across different chains. What it means is that we work with the other protocols, as Euclid was saying, in the chain abstraction stack, in particular with other bridges, to help their solvers, so the entities that fulfill intents, to really rebalance the liquidity at the cheapest price. And in this way, we can help bridges to provide a cheaper price to the users, and then the overall experience kind of benefits.
Got it. That's great. Thanks, Max. Yeah, Tabasco.
Yeah. So my name is my name's Tabasco. My real name is Ethan, and I lead developer relations at Particle Network. I've been doing developer relations for around 3 years now. Previously, I was at an RPC provider. Been at Particle for around a year now. The kind of like TLDR of what we do at Particle and kind of our key differentiator is that our kind of main product or technology, especially within chain abstraction, is something called universal accounts. Very simply, universal accounts are sort of like an evolution of smart accounts. So they use account abstraction as kind of the foundation to give users the ability to basically have a single account, a single balance, and kind of a single address that they can use across the entire ecosystem. So for example, if I have 10 USDC on Polygon and 10 USDC on Base and 10 on Arbitrum, then really I have 30 USDC that I can use anywhere, and I don't need to manually bridge or do any of the other account-based complexities that are typically associated with this. And so we specifically position ourselves within the chain abstraction landscape at something that we call account level chain abstraction. So chain abstraction that's specifically targeting the account level. And we work really closely with other protocols in the space as well that are specifically working on something that we call application level chain abstraction. So things like orchestration. So if you guys are familiar with Agoric and other Cluster and Socket and kind of projects at that level, we aim to kind of create this layered experience where you have users that are chain agnostic through account level chain abstraction through things like universal accounts. We're also very big fans of credible accounts and stuff like this from OneBalance, and might even end up using something of that nature in the future. And then so chain agnostic users at the account level, and then of course you have chain agnostic applications through things like orchestration. So that's our unique positioning, and so we've kind of evolved from account abstraction to this account level space with universal accounts.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll kick things off from here, and I will basically have 2, maybe 3 questions for each and every one of you. But at the end of anyone answering, just feel free to interrupt and jump in if you have an atypical or a specific point of view related to that question. So we'll keep it free flowing that way. And then we'll just end with a couple of common questions amongst the 3 of you. So actually, let's start with you, Tabasco, because you guys have actually done the splendid job of actually going ahead and defining chain abstraction for us. Can you actually, for the benefit of the audience, I think no better place to start. Firstly, tell us what is chain abstraction?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a good question because I think that for a long time in the vertical, there's not been a lot of consistency around like what is chain abstraction, what does chain abstraction actually affect, and I do still believe that it's an evolving thing and that there does still need to be more of a uniform opinion throughout the chain abstraction vertical. But specifically, what we found to be the best way to define chain abstraction broadly is simply a user experience that's exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains. So what I mean by that, by these manual processes required to interact with multiple chains, things like bridging or managing multiple wallets or managing multiple balances across chains, or having to only use certain dApps because you only have funds on a given chain, stuff like this, right? So essentially chain abstraction aims to look at the user experience, and it kind of acknowledges that at the moment, one of the biggest pain points in Web3 is that users are confined to specific distinct blockchains, and they have a pretty high barrier if they want to actually move across chains and use applications in other ecosystems. So we require users to not only cognitively manage their balances across, 4 or 5 different chains. So like users, we're saying, hey, you want to use Polygon, Arbitrum, and Base, you have to actually keep track of your balances in all these chains. And then if you want to use an application on Base that, costs a certain amount and you don't have the funds on Base, you need to actually bridge over from your other chains, which is a whole complicated process in and of itself. And so today, especially with multi-chain user experience, we ask a lot from end users, way more than can really be expected from users, especially at the consumer level. So because of this, user experience at like a larger, broader ecosystem level in Web3 is fundamentally broken. And so what I usually say is like user experience in like as Web3 has kind of evolved and more of a focus on user experience, actually you can create great user experience today with things like account abstraction, gas abstraction, all these like interesting tools that have come up, but only in the confines of a given application. So if I'm a developer and I'm building an application using things like, account abstraction, social logins, whatever else it may be, I can create a great user experience. But the larger issue is that this doesn't apply across the entire ecosystem. It's only within this one application. So as soon as I want to go and use a different app from a different chain, this experience breaks down. I have to use a different wallet, or I have to figure out how to bridge my funds over, whatever else it may be. So this is where chain abstraction comes in to basically solve this problem and say, well, how do we allow users to use the entire ecosystem without the complexities that are typically associated with this interaction? So users no longer have to bridge within a chain abstracted landscape. Users no longer have to manage their balances across chains. Simply users go to an application and they just use it. Their balances can be sourced from however many chains they've deposited on. Users are removed from the notion of distinct blockchains to the point where users, the only thing that they have a relationship with is the application that they're using. They're removed from the underlying infrastructure. And so blockchains fade into more of this they kind of turn into like AWS and GCP and how that is to Web 2 today. Like, I don't know if, Restream or Twitter is using AWS or GCP. I don't really care. It's just that's what they chose, right? So that's how chains are transitioning, because they're turning into far more background infrastructure that is irrelevant to the end user. And this is happening as a result of chain abstraction. So this is kind of the UX movement that's happening in the ecosystem today.
Got it. Great. So I think that's a fairly holistic view of what chain abstraction is, alongside the definition, of course. But I saw earlier today, or was it yesterday? I'm not sure. But you put out a poll saying, what is chain abstraction to people? And it was basically asking, is it solving all of the UX problems versus solving only the cross-chain problems? And so I think logically, I'd love to ask you, what according to you is chain abstraction not?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about over the past few days, especially because what I found is that like people broadly agree within the chain abstraction landscape that like we all agree like what problem chain abstraction is solving, at least at a high level. It's like, okay, it's solving a lot of the multi-chain complexity. But what I found, especially recently and after ECC and stuff like this, is that there is a little bit of like within the chain abstraction vertical, there's a divide of understanding where some projects and some individuals, they see chain abstraction as actually a larger goal of removing all on-chain complexities. So not only multi-chain complexities, but things like gas and key management and stuff that isn't necessarily related to multi-chain, but is just a part of the kind of like the Web3 experience. And then some see it more narrowly as specifically the multi-chain experience. Me specifically, and to be clear, I think this is actually still an evolving conversation that I don't think there's like a 100% right answer to just yet. I've been trying to get as many opinions on it as possible, just because I think it's kind of an interesting conversation. But at least me specifically, I see chain abstraction as a little bit more narrow, as being specifically focused on multi-chain complexities. So kind of what I mentioned earlier, like the bridging component and managing multiple balances and multiple accounts and wallets and stuff like this. These are complexities that are associated with moving across multiple distinct chains. And so chain abstraction, at least for now, is narrowly addressing these problems. Although I do think that chain abstraction has the capacity to evolve into a broader idea. So I think if you guys know Orb Labs, I believe they're one of their founders. He mentioned this on a recent call that we had, which is that right now the scope of chain abstraction might be narrow, but over time it'll probably evolve into something that's a little bit broader and maybe include more things. But I do think, at least as it is today, chain abstraction is specifically multi-chain complexity and doesn't entirely encompass everything outside of that. I would probably consider that more broadly as just like improving user experience. But I do think it's an interesting conversation, and everybody has a slightly different take on it.
So I have a ever so slightly different take on it. Just to add a bit of fire to the mix. I think if we look back a couple of years ago, when we were just starting to scale blockchains, for example, we didn't have this clear definition of what's needed to scale a blockchain, and the end result is the problem we have right now. And we have thousands of different chains and all of this kind of fragmentation. To me, chain abstraction, or to define this chain abstraction, is ultimately to have a good user experience, ultimately, and to have the same user experience as we do in Web 2 to bring it to Web 3. And yes, it includes obviously obfuscating the chains, but also means getting rid of the problems of gas fees. And I don't mean like getting rid of gas fees. I mean the user has no context on what they're paying their gas fees in. So they can pay in USDC, they can pay in the native assets, they can pay in BTC if they want, because they're not siloed to a certain ecosystem, is my interpretation of what chain abstraction is. And until we bring that experience to Web3, we haven't achieved it. And similar to what you said before, Tabasco, you could be using Restream now and you don't care if it's hosted on Amazon Web Services or any other payment provider, and you don't care if how you pay for that service is with Stripe or Visa card or MasterCard or any kind of one other payment providers. It's just done for you. So in that same way, we should encompass not only like the user experience of just interacting with it, but also the payment features and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. I do think that when you look at broadly multi-chain complexity and kind of what this encompasses at an experience level, gas fees are absolutely another component that are important, because another point of friction in the space today is that as a user, I need to have ETH for Ethereum, and for every distinct chain that I'm using, I have to hold a different native token. And so ideally in the future, and the other thing that definitely I find as an interesting component of chain abstraction, especially at the account level, is the ability to, for example, I can do a transaction on, Ethereum, on OpenSea. I can buy an NFT and I can pay for that transaction using USDC from Solana or whatever other chain I want. And so this is, I think, an important part of the user experience that will definitely start to materialize, I think, alongside kind of this, a unified liquidity that, of course, a lot of these account level solutions are building towards as well. And so I even would say, like, the complexity being solved by chain abstraction, like more broadly at the multi-chain level, even includes things like orchestration. I'm a big fan of this idea of orchestration and sort of like application level chain abstraction, which is kind of like the idea of creating chain agnostic applications. So you can imagine as a user actually being able to go to an application, and that application can compose across like 10, 20 different chains, its own app chain, Polygon, Ethereum, whatever else it's using. And as a user, I can do a transaction, and that transaction can actually encompass multiple different ecosystems, and I can take advantage of different applications and different things across the entire ecosystem. And as a user, I have no idea this is happening. I'm just kind of using this application. And as a result, this application is chain agnostic in nature. And I would even include this under kind of the umbrella of the complexities being solved by chain abstraction, because even at a developer level, programmatically, that isn't very simple today, and a lot of orchestration solutions are fixing this. So I think that chain abstraction is, and maybe it was Burnt from Zion that said this as well in one of our recent Twitter spaces, was that chain abstraction is still like a very broad idea that encompasses a lot of different things. And so I think that, especially as it starts to, evolve and really materialize over the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to start to see kind of the core user experience problems being solved. Those are going to be highlighted, and I think that's when we're going to have a much clearer idea of the exact scope of everything that chain abstraction encompasses, at least to start. And so I think that we're approaching the materialization of a lot of that very quickly.
Well, great, fantastic. I mean, I think, just at the risk of like debating semantics, I think what Tabasco is saying and what Euclid is saying, I think what we need to kind of get to is definitely this place that Euclid described. I think it's just a question of, do we call it chain abstraction, or is it called something else? This basically a simulation of multiple sort of like solutions that actually give this Web 2S sort of experience. But I think we'll keep that for another day.
And I think at some point it will just be called Web3 experience, like, or even the internet experience, which is right. We don't do this type of definitions when we browse on Google and on Facebook. It will just become the default experience. And I agree with everybody. It's definitely what we need to head to as a space.
No, great, fantastic. Yeah, while we've been setting the stage, we've had Ovia from Octo join us. Hi, Ovia. Glad you could make it finally. You've had some troubles, but good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Mayur. Thanks for the welcome. Yeah, I'm sorry about this. The internet has been crazy today. I'm so
quick introduction, Ovia.
Yeah, so I'm Ovia. I'm part of the Octo team. I'm a DevRel here, and we've been working on chain abstraction for quite some time now, and happy to talk more about Octo and how we're solving this problem.
Yeah, sure. Actually, let's kick things off with you, because we're on the subject of what is chain abstraction and what it is not. And I was looking through Octo's offering, and I see that you guys are speaking about chain abstraction, gas abstraction, and I think it was protocol abstraction. I'm curious to understand what your guys' sort of like goals are.
I caught Ethan's statement on what could be chain abstraction, what it's not, and when people just say abstraction of the chain, other people also include account and fee. So here's my take on it. So a few years ago, people were debating whether Web3 is going to be like a single chain battle, which chain survives kind of battle. But we've come far away from that. So we know that we need layer ones, and for scalability we need layer twos, and we do envision a future where every dApps come up with their own chain. So this is going to be a fragmented right? So they're going to be, it's going to increase exponentially, and there's no way for app builders to manage all of these chains. And with with such a fragmented ecosystem, even liquidity gets diluted, right? But we also want to increase Web3 adoption, bring more users, and improve their user experience. And this cannot go hand in hand. Like, you cannot build for user experience and take care of such a fragmented ecosystem. And it's time to decouple these two things. So there should be protocols that are solving the asset management, liquidity, fragmentation problem, but it should not hinder the development of user apps, and you should be able to deliver good user experience and good developer experience. And app builders should only focus on business logic and their user experience, and not have to think about this kind of fragmentation of the growing Web3 world, right? So this is where chain abstraction comes for me. Forget everything blockchain related. That includes fee, account, everything. Like the only way we can grow applications in the Web3 world is Web2 users. And Web2 users have a massive onboarding challenge, and it's a very steep learning curve, which they don't want to do, and the funnel, they drop off the funnel. So we need to make this Web3 building experience very Web2 like for them, and that's what Octo is trying to do. We want builders to build only for the business logic and the user experience. Don't have to think about managing accounts, don't have to think about transaction handling, fee management, and don't have to even think about the chains that are coming in. The chain should just be a parameter that they pass while invoking an API. So,
Got it. Interesting. Like more developer focus, less like focus towards like the end user, making their lives easy so they can build better quality applications, feeding mass adoption in general.
Yeah, that's all they should do.
Great. Okay, so moving on from that, Euclid, let's talk about OneBalance and how you guys are, let me get this right, a framework for accounts on credible commitment machines, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be great if, so I've read up on, of course, credible commitment and all of these sorts of things, but I think in general for the audience, I think it'd be useful if we could basically set the stage for what are credible commitments, what is a credible commitment machine, and why should an account live on a credible commitment machine? Quite a mouthful, but yes.
Perfect. No, it's quite a tongue twizzler, that one. So yeah, and the best way to put this is to again have a quick look back a few years ago and see how the whole crypto ecosystem evolved. And we're still evolving now around a chain-centric model, where new chains develop and everything else develops around this one chain. We have, new dApps deploying on the chain, we have new wallets deploying on the chain, we have new smart accounts deploying on this chain, and we're all pivoting around this chain. And what that means is everything becomes siloed and everything becomes fragmented, hence this whole point of chain abstraction now. We're turning everything on the head, and we should say, let's now pivot towards an account-centric model, where as long as all users focus around the accounts, people can build around the accounts, and then everything connects towards together. So we're introducing this idea of credible accounts, and they're built on credible commitment machines. Now, what are these accounts? CCMs are essentially, you think of each one as within its own rollup, and the CCM is responsible for monitoring states of user balances across all of these different rollups. And once users have funds within the OneBalance CCM, they are free to use and spend it as they want. And the way it works is the user would provide an intent. For example, let's say they have 1,000 USDC split across 10 chains. From their point of view, they would see they have $1,000, and the CCM would register that. They have the intent to buy a NFT on OpenSea, as Tabasco mentioned before. What would happen is we allow execution to happen before settlement. So this intent gets submitted to solvers. Solvers fulfill this intent within a required block time. The user receives the NFT, and the funds are released from a resource lock within OneBalance's CCM. So from the user's point of view, they can have Solana speed execution with the underlying security of Ethereum, for example. And everything after the fact can then be resolved on the back end side that the user doesn't have to see. And we utilize several different infrastructure providers, such as Everclear, to help resolve this. Have I frozen?
I seem to
you're
have.
good.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah. No. So great. So what you guys have managed to provide for is this framework by which primarily almost everyone in the chain abstraction space almost needs to collect funds from a user before actually being able to kind of get someone to front this liquidity, right? A solver, in all likelihood. But what you've done is you flip that, and by saying that because an account lives on this machine, which makes these credible commitments, so to say, you can actually have the fronting of liquidity happen first, because the user now does not have this chance to potentially double spend that money elsewhere. Would that be fair to kind of say is the primary goal?
Beautifully put. So when a user has funds within our CCM and they want to spend it, those funds are put within a resource lock. And what we say to solvers is users cannot equivocate, so they can't double spend on this. And that means solvers can act on this instantly and they can execute it. Traditionally, what happens if you're using a bridge is, or even if you're depositing to Binance, for example, you send the funds, you check on ETHScanner or whatever block scanner you use, you see it's been executed. But what happens on Binance's side is you see it's 1 out of 200 blocks. They have to wait for a set number of blocks for them to deem it as final, finality to be achieved. And that's a time delay that the user just simply shouldn't have to put up with. If you send funds, bank transfer, I'm not sure how it is in the US, but in the UK, if you use FPS, it's near instant, and we don't have that delay of where is my money gone. And especially within this space, if you're monitoring your transaction and this is your first time using the space and you have no idea where it's gone, you're just going to be panicked. So we allow it to happen near instantaneously.
Got it. So this would immediately put doubts in some people's minds as to being a custodial solution. But I've read, of course, that you guys talk about how it is non-custodial. So what properties of this framework kind of make this whole credible commitment accounts non-custodial?
So yes, it is completely self-custodial. So the users obviously are in control of their balances at all time. That's always a guarantee. The way we're executing it could be through 4 different ways. TEEs are looking to be our most likely scenario. We're obviously still working on building and testing out different situations, so I don't want to provide you with the wrong information, but we're likely to go down the TEE route and build our infrastructure around that to start.
Okay. So would my keys live on this trusted execution environment? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so user would have one half of the key, and the other half of the key would live within the one balance CCM, within the TEE, and so it would be a co-signing. So the user would obviously sign a transaction, our CCM would see it, make sure it hasn't invalidated any rules, co-sign that transaction, and then the transaction would be executed. Obviously, that does mean if for some reason one balance does go down, you can't sign transactions, but because it's self-custodial, you can always withdraw your funds back to the underlying chain.
Understood. Fantastic. Thanks for that, Euclid. Moving on, Max. What is great developer experience? OVR touched upon it and why that's important. Euclid was just talking about the user experience side of things and how we can make things faster. But let's talk about the money side of it. And very clearly, that's where you guys are operating. And can you tell us why clearing is such an important thing within the whole chain abstraction ecosystem?
Yes, with pleasure. And I think it connects very well with the process that Euclid was describing, which is something that we've done in a sort of form for the past 2-3 years, because Connext used to be an intent-based bridge using solvers as well. So the mechanism that Euclid has described involves these actors called solvers that basically are able to use their own inventory to front transactions on behalf of the users on the destination chain, and then execute them almost instantly. So the user doesn't have to wait for or incur into all those bridging complexities and wait times that we described. And so this is great, right? This is where you can achieve that ultimate experience that we were discussing about before. Like somebody, like a specialized entity, will manage all the complexities for you. You will send an intent, so the instructions of what we want to do, and then somebody will do it on your behalf, right? They will bridge their funds, they will front their own cash, and then they will do those swaps, deposits, whatever needs to be done. Now the problem at that point becomes, okay, this solver has fronted. The user used to have his funds on chain A. The solver fronted his own liquidity on chain B. So how do we cheaply move, after the intent has been executed, how do we move the liquidity of the user from chain A to back to chain B to refund the solver on the destination chain in the cheapest possible way? And this is a problem we've been facing for years, basically. We do our own bridge. And so basically we realized that it was a shared problem across all the solvers, all the network of solvers, all the intent-based bridges. And we figured out that the cheapest possible way you can rebalance the liquidity of the solvers is to actually net them against each other. So if there is a solver that needs to rebalance on Optimism and has its funds on Arbitrum, and there is another solver that instead has its funds on Arbitrum and needs to be rebalanced on Optimism, we can identify simply these constants of ones and net them with each other. So the tokens will be swapped with each other. And so these can be extended to any players, any type of solver, any type of intent-based protocol across the hundreds and thousands of chains that are popping up. So this is what Everclear does. Everclear is a clearing layer, meaning that we look at all the transactions that need to happen for solvers, so for entities that are not in urgency anymore to execute the transactions because they already did it for the users. They need to be refunded, and they're looking at the cheapest possible way to do it. And so we coordinate all these liquidity settlements to happen, and then we net them with each other. And that's how we cut costs to the lowest. And what it means is that if we cut costs for solvers, they can also provide cheaper pricing for users. So the transactions that these all intents, these nice features that we were describing, can also happen in a very cheap way. And so that's where the famous chain abstraction experience becomes possible, because you're not now losing 10 BPS of your funds when moving across chains. You're just looking at a very micro fee, and that becomes very useful in the overall operations.
Fantastic. So just if I can summarize, what you've said is, by reducing the number of bridging transactions that need to happen in order to kind of rebalance a solver.
Mm-hmm.
Like a solver has basically spent funds on chain B, got a bunch of funds on chain A, find someone who needs funds on chain A and has funds on chain B, match these people, so you net them off. So these are just transactions which are not percentages of the transaction volume, so hence it becomes cheaper, and all of this can basically trickle down all the way down to the user, and making everything cheaper or make everyone richer in a sense.
That's very correct. Absolutely. We are looking at the second phase of the intent process, which is like not the one that is facing the user, but the ones that the industry needs to solve somehow. And so if we manage to make that part as cheap as possible, then everything cascades down to the user experience.
All right, cool. Thanks so much, Max. Tabasco, back to you. So we've just spoken about how Max and the great guys at Everclear are doing all this amazing stuff to kind of make it cheaper for everyone to do chain abstraction, and for users especially to have this sort of multi-chain experience. Do you think that's where value accrues in the so-called cake framework or the different layers? Do you think that's where most of the value accrues?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting question. I would say most likely. Sorry, a little bit sick this week, but the kind of way that I see it is that essentially chain abstraction. Well, I guess first of all, before I kind of address that, I think to first talk about one balance and Everclear specifically, I think that in general, especially with a lot of account-based solutions, including what we're doing at Particle, like this kind of method of moving funds across chains through fillers and through funding funds and basically paying for the user transaction, then these fillers paying themselves back. This is a pretty common way of doing it, and we do the same at Particle. The issue is that this process has some friction attached to it. In the case of one balance, for example, you have reorg risk and double spending and stuff like this. And so I want to highlight first that like in the stack, organizations like One Balance are solving a really crucial problem, especially for other chain abstraction solutions as well. And so this is why we're also considering maybe in the future to leverage One Balance to some degree, because there is that problem there that we also face of like, we have this this mechanism of moving funds across chains, but there is some risk that's being taken there because there could be a reorg or there could be some mechanism where whenever I'm trying to front these funds, there's not I can't repay this to the filler. So this is something that we've thought a lot about and that we've done a lot of exploration about. And I think that both Everclear and One Balance are very interesting projects because in the chain abstraction stack, they fit in a very specific and narrow place where they're solving problems for other chain abstraction solutions that are very common. And so Everclear as well, we're also exploring a lot of kind of overlap there and how we could potentially implement that within our own kind of like filler solver system. And so when you look at the overall chain abstraction stack and kind of how value is accrued, how actual innovations are created, the way that we see it is like you kind of have two key frameworks that have proliferated over the past 6-7 months. The first is the Cake framework. So the Cake framework, at least the way that we see it, is a pretty granular way of looking at the technologies that compose chain abstraction. So Cake is, of course, chain abstracting key elements. And so that framework is looking at what technologies actually lead to a chain abstracted experience. And so when you look at a layer above this, something that's a little bit more broad and specifically focused on chain abstraction solutions like Arcana, like One Balance, Everclear, Particle Network, and Octo. This is where a framework that we call the layered or like the multi-layer framework also comes in to present a pretty good view of kind of how the landscape works. So we see like the full acquisition of chain abstraction basically happening through a layered usage of, like I mentioned earlier, application level chain abstraction. So things like Octo, orchestration, more developer facing solutions that really allow developers to build powerful chain agnostic applications. Then below this, you have account level chain abstraction, which is things like Particle and even Arcana in terms of really solving a lot of the friction at the wallet and account level for end users. Then you have at the blockchain level, which is kind of like the third layer, you have interoperability, and you have things like AgLayer, right? So AgLayer or zk-Sync, Elastic Chain, stuff like this. These are also big unlocks because they enable really intrinsic interoperability and shared liquidity and stuff like this across chains. And so when you have a stack of these types of solutions all working together in a single experience, this is where like the true power of chain abstraction really starts to be unlocked. And this is at least how we see it. But to get to a true chain abstraction experience, you need a lot of these solutions that we call foundational solutions. So foundational solutions are essentially infrastructure that allows these broader chain abstraction solutions like Arcana, like Particle, like Octo, to really operate in a way that has very low risk and is very efficient and actually enables this UX unlock that we're talking about. So we typically look at things like Everclear and even One Balance to some degree as these really foundational solutions that enable intrinsically like what is the chain abstraction experience today through the means of other projects like Arcana, Particle, and Octo. And so I think when you look at the chain abstraction stack and how the value is accrued, definitely these types of products we have a lot of respect for, and I think are really allowing the experience to materialize. And so that's like the first step in the process. And then of course you have all these great solutions that are building at this kind of like broader, more account, application, or blockchain level that kind of actually is the interface that users and developers use to create a chain abstraction experience. And so like I mentioned earlier, the way that we really see the future of chain abstraction is that you're going to go to an application that can orchestrate and exist across multiple chains very easily. Like we said earlier, like chains become a very kind of composable part of an application to developers. It's very simple for them to work with. And then at the account level, users, they can go and interact with whatever application across any blockchain without needing to really know about these distinct chains and kind of exist agnostically within the ecosystem. This is kind of what Arcana does, as well as what Particle does to some degree. And then, of course, you can, ideally these chains are, they have some degree of shared liquidity or intrinsic interoperability that makes the experience even that much better. And of course, this is all enabled foundationally by things like one balance for credible accounts and credible commitments, as well as things like Everclear. So that's at least how I view the stack. And I think that it creates for a very collaborative experience in chain abstraction. And I believe it was Arjun from Everclear that said this on one of the recent live streams that we did, which is that very similar to the modular setup, like the modular ecosystem and other kind of verticals in space at the moment, chain abstraction can really only be achieved through layered usage of multiple solutions that are each kind of attacking a different problem narrowly, right? So each solution is sort of like addressing a different part of the stack. This is basically what enables a truly chain abstraction experience. And so this is where chain abstraction really is differentiated from things like, other verticals like ZK or AI or whatever it may be, because those are very competitive and there's basically it's less positive sum than chain abstraction is, whereas chain abstraction is a much broader goal that requires the collaborative usage of multiple solutions. And so this is, I think, a very unique property of chain abstraction that you can even see materialize in the projects on the panel today.
Understood. No, thanks for breaking that down so well, Tabasco. My motivation for asking this question of where sort of value accrues was primarily from the fact that we've seen this play out in Web3 time and time again, is essentially all of like capital and then consequently dev effort, and then you could extrapolate that to hype and many other sorts of things, end up going to like the one place where value accrues. We've seen this happen, like chains are the most valuable, and we've seen how Euclid talks about, no, we need to change the paradigm. It's not chain centric, it has to be account centric. And so then you have people building like ERC-4337 middleware, but not really like the end solutions that people can actually experience some of these, like all the benefits of account abstraction. So I was just motivated to ask this because I don't want us to kind of end up in that same place where suddenly we feel like, okay, so all the value is going to accrue there, all the capital is going to kind of move there, all the hype is there, and now everyone just starts pivoting and start building at one layer or the other and competing and really not innovating across the stack, which I personally have seen play out. So that was what I was kind of trying to get from you, to see you feel it'll accrue massively in one place, or will it kind of just play out across the stack? But yeah,
for sure. I think it's a good kind of branch off of kind of like when you look at the chain abstraction stack and like where does value really accrue. I think the chain abstraction is unique, where like you definitely have a lot of value accrual at these more foundational solutions that are like the infrastructure for the chain abstraction solutions that then target end users. But I do think that chain abstraction, especially in the stack that I just kind of went over, is interesting because each part of that stack is especially at the account and application level, are equally important for a truly chain abstraction experience and have both very large addressable markets. And they both accrue value to some degree, whether it be through like gas fees or however these different projects decide to actually accrue value in that regard. And so I would personally be pretty surprised if there was one part of the stack that was really focused on because of some like, exceptional value accrual that was different from every other part of the stack. I think that chain abstraction is also like a part of this whole like collaborative idea is unique in that each part of the stack is equally necessary, to the point where even as we've seen it in the landscape today, there are a lot of account level solutions, there are a lot of application level solutions, there's a lot of blockchain level solutions, there's plenty of foundational solutions. And so there is like, and I think this is a great part about the vertical as well, is that we aren't seeing an imbalance of like way too many people that want to do account level chain abstraction, or way too many people that want to do orchestration, or way too many people that want to do foundational. Because of that relatively equivalent value accrual, I think we've seen a very healthy balance of projects across each part of the stack. And we actually posted a graphic maybe a few weeks or a month or two ago where we kind of looked at the vertical from account level, application level, foundational, blockchain level, and we placed each major project in the stack. And you can see there, like, it's pretty equal across all of these. You have a very healthy amount in each level, which I think is very indicative of what is good growth in the vertical. The other point I just want to touch on, like, super quickly, is that when you look at, it's a little bit of a slightly related point, but when you look at value accrual in the space overall, so like if we just take a step back from chain abstraction solutions in specific, like who's going to actually win in like the ultimate, like the chain abstraction stack, right? If we take a step back and even look broader of like currently in the space, incentives for developers and for chains and for users are in a place that rewards like repetitive deployment of like not very innovative applications. Users go from chain to chain based on airdrops and incentives. Chains spend millions on marketing and airdrops to get a small amount of users to their chain. So actually, value accrual and incentives in the larger industry is pretty broken at the moment, and it actually doesn't really result in a lot of net growth. And we've seen this. It's like we're just burning money for not a great reason. And so I think chain abstraction as well, that is maybe a less talked about part of the problem here, that chain abstraction will actually fix a lot of this. Because, for example, if we take a look at like chains spending millions of dollars on airdrops to get some amount of users, this doesn't really apply anymore because users aren't aware of the chain that they're using. So why would I spend, millions of dollars on airdropping to users that they don't even know that they're using my chain? And so really the whole incentive structure in the space shifts towards how can we make the best experience for developers, have them build in our chain, and how do developers create applications that really attract users? Because at the application level as well, if I'm building a DEX on Linea, then my competition is other DEXs on Linea, right? Or other applications on Linea. I'm not competing with some DEX or application on BNB. And so what we're going to see is all of a sudden, I will be competing with a DEX on BNB or an application on BNB because these barriers are completely removed. And so as a user, all applications are an equal playing field. So chains need to be more developer-centric. They need to create higher quality solutions that developers really want to use. And application developers need to create better, more innovative applications that users really want to use. They can't rely on ecosystem-specific benefits. They need to actually create good applications that people really want to use at a UX level. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting part of chain abstraction that will shift a big part of the dynamics within the industry. So this is also a point I wanted to mention.
No, I think that's a good... Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I know I don't want to take your job away from you. But this is a question that I've always been concerned of, and I want to ask yourself, Tabasco, here. How do you think the shift will evolve as chain abstraction becomes more prominent? You mentioned that chains are obviously doing this airdrops, and eventually these incentives will fall away. But how do you see this pivoting now? Because so as chain abstraction becomes more and more prominent, users obviously aren't going to care which chain they're on, but they're probably not going to use chain abstraction tools just yet because they want to use a particular network right now so that they can get this airdrop. Where do you see this kind of shift happening and the transitioning?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's going to be like we're going to wake up one day and all of a sudden like users aren't going to care about chains and like, chains are not going to want to do airdrops anymore. But what I do think is that, and like, to be honest, we've also seen a lot of pushback from like current crypto native users that actually don't really want chain abstraction because they say, well, I want to know what chain I'm using. I want to know where my assets are, stuff like this. And so like, I get that as well. I think sometimes I'm not I'll usually push back against that take. I'm like, well, really chain abstraction isn't targeting the users that are in the space today necessarily. Most of the users that are in the space today, they're either here because they're developers or they work in a project, or they're here to farm airdrops. That's like a lot of the users in the ecosystem. And so for them, of course, like they want to go to specific chains, they want to like actually gather that incentive. But what I think as chain abstraction proliferates, ideally what will happen is that it'll act as a conduit for good applications that use chain abstraction to onboard new users. And as we start to see an inflow of new users as a result of kind of this reduced complexity, I think we'll start to see a slow shift. This will probably take quite a while to actually occur and really have a full effect. Well, we'll start to see a slow shift of incentives, where chains start to realize that these kind of new users that are flooding into space, they don't really care, or they don't have really a perception that airdrops are helpful for. And so they're still airdropping for these like 20,000 users that are just going between chains. And I think eventually this will be realized, especially if we have an influx of new users that are chain agnostic. And then as that starts to shift, I think developers will realize as well that, okay, well, these new users that are coming in the space as a result of chain abstraction and the initial adoption of these solutions, I need to position myself to take advantage of these new users, because that's where ultimately I will get the most value. All right, so I think as soon as chain abstraction succeeds initially to a point where the value accrual of building like applications for chain abstraction, building better applications, and has chains shifting where their focus on is on incentive wise, I think once that is better like monetarily than the current setup, that's when we're going to start to see this big shift. I think it'll take a while to get there though, because I think we're still in this whole landscape where airdrops and trading users and stuff like this is kind of the standard. But I think honestly this actually isn't a very good way to make revenue. And so I think people are pretty tired of it as well. So I think chain abstraction will be a welcome experience, especially once it starts to be a point for new users to get into the space. That's how I see it. So I would say, like, in terms of like a specific timeline, most chain abstraction solutions, I think we'll see initial adoption in 6 to 8 months for a lot of different parts of the stack. I think this shift on an industry level will probably be pretty staggered because of that initial adoption curve, and then eventually people will buy into it as the incentives change. I think that is probably more on like a 2-year scale, maybe 3 years, depending upon how things move. So that's how I see it, at least.
I just want to add on to that. So that I think chains will also have to start introspecting on bringing out their novelty, because there are chain abstraction solutions available, and as you say, the users are not just going to jump chain to chain just for the airdrops. So chains have to really like prove themselves in terms of why people should build on them, and chains will not be after gaining the user base. They'll actually focus on getting good projects built on them. So utility based projects, they'll probably fund more such projects, and the apps will be the primary way in which the chains get the users and transaction volume. So I see.
It's solid take. I absolutely agree. Euclid, you asked the question, but do you have your own take?
I actually don't have a take right now.
Okay.
I'm still gathering thoughts on how I foresee it doing it. Ultimately, like, users move primarily on incentives, right? It's how like new banks get users to use their bank in the first place. And it's the same thing with dApps. It's the same thing with no matter what you launch, there needs to be an incentive for a user to use your chain, your product. And if we take away this incentive, and there's this brand new chain that can suddenly resolve everything, and it's got AI written into it, and it makes you £1 million, it's promised you the world. How does it get users on board? Where does the incentive come from? And maybe they work hand in hand with the likes of OneBalance or account providers directly, but ultimately I'm not too sure.
Max, any thoughts you'd like to put in here? Because this seems pretty like a pretty solid place to kind of have this discussion, where we are talking about this almost like a paradigm shift, where you don't have application developers running to chains in order to kind of, because they have more users, they have more liquidity, and so they build wherever it makes sense for them. Ovi, I was talking about it earlier. And now you have users who can go to literally any app on any chain, thanks to the credible accounts that OneBalance is providing. What does this look like in let's say a year from now?
Yeah, I generally agree with the thoughts that Tabasco was sharing. Chain abstraction is not a kind of either a 0 or 1 state where you either are fully chain abstracted or you are fully aware of where the chains are. We will see a gradual move or rather shift towards this better improvement of the experience that we are describing, right? Different pieces will go live at different times, it will get adopted at different times, but it will be a smooth experience until my mom will be able to download an app, press the button, and then execute a transaction on whatever chain the app is without even knowing that what she's doing. right? That's where we want to end up. And I think it will be a very exponential growth in terms of experience. Like we're starting slow, and as soon as all these pieces come together, as soon as the builders realize the potential of what we're doing, we're starting to see the first hints with Fremtech, who used to started with abstracting the wallets, and then maybe Polymarket will start to abstract the inflows of USDC from all the other chains rather than only focusing on Polygon. All these small pieces will then create the standard for the new experience, which will then improve until we get to a state where we all want to be. And so I think we will see the real good experiences by the end of the year, and then it will become more adopted as an industry standard as soon as they see the success of these early projects.
Okay. No, great. Thanks for that, Max. I have a whole bunch of follow-up questions, but we are running out of time. So what I will do is I will request all you guys to probably come back again. We do part 2 of this sometime later, and hopefully Euclid has a solid take on what account-centric world looks like by then.
Do your homework.
But before I let you guys, go, just one question to each of you. What is it that we can expect from your project in the immediate future, and what is one hot take that you have for this space, like something that will or won't play out the way people are imagining it today? Euclid, we'll start with you.
So interesting thing that's coming out. One Balance has currently opened up their whitelist. With our MVP coming out shortly. The only way to get access is obviously by registering for that whitelist. There may or may not be additional, rewards to come if you sign up for the whitelist, because we like to reward OGs. And I have to be very careful with what I say with a cold take. Can you come back to me on what I think's not going to pan out?
Sure, fair enough. Ovia, you want to do the same thing?
Yeah, sure. So Octa is coming up with its chain soon. So we have 3 main components. You have the orchestration layer, which is the chain, and then we have something called the decentralized transaction network, DTN for short, and decentralized wallet network. So our idea is to make this whole space composable. Like we should be able to plug and play different solutions. So hopefully maybe Particle Network, One Balance, they can be part of our DWN network. So you can be the account providers for our orchestration layer. So yeah, that's definitely possible. So I think so. K framework was a good first step, but I do think that we'll need good specifications for solutions in this account abstraction space to bloom. So we need some kind of agreement on how we're going to build things. So I expect solutions and protocols engaging in building a proper specification for the other players. That's pretty much it.
Got it. Thanks so much, Ovia. Max, you want to go next? What can we expect from Everclear in the immediate future, and what's your one hot take for this industry?
Yeah, with pleasure. So Everclear is currently on testnet. We aim to be live within the next 5 weeks. So that will be our exciting launch happening somewhere at the beginning of September. So please be ready for some fireworks for that. And then controversial take, I've seen recently a lot of hate against new layer 2s and new chains that are going to be launched. So some people expect to see a reduction of those chains. And I instead imagine that I'm willing to bet actually that by the end of the year, we'll get to more than 500 layer 2s. And by next year, we'll get to at least a couple of thousands of rollups that are live on mainnet. Spinning up a layer 2 is becoming extremely easy right now with the rollup as a service. And so what we're doing here is not only necessary, right? It's the only solution that we have for the space. And so we are working towards a better internet, a better financial system. And I think our small piece is like contributing to this is like creating a user experience that works for the normal man in the world.
Fantastic. Thanks, Max. Tabasco, over to you.
Yeah, for sure. So Particle, kind of the things that are coming up for us is really mainnet. So we're launching our mainnet SDK in just a few months, basically like 2 months is kind of our current target. And so this will mean that you can start using universal accounts on applications on pretty much any EVM chain very, very soon. So I'm really excited for that. And it's going to be basically every application that's already using our account abstraction SDK tech will automatically be compatible with universal accounts. And as soon as we launch the mainnet SDK. So I'm really excited, and I think that this will yield a lot of like a pretty huge ecosystem of hundreds of applications that will already be chain abstracted at the account level through universal accounts in basically just kind of the coming quarter or so. So that's kind of the biggest thing that's coming up for us is really the release of universal accounts and those going live on mainnet. In terms of a hot take, I thought about it a little bit. I think that I was going to say something about kind of like the industry and kind of incentives and stuff like that. I think we talked about that, and so I expressed my opinion there. But I think specifically like on a technological and infrastructure level, personally, I've still yet to be 100% convinced of how chain collectives will really impact the entire landscape. And so what I mean by this is things like AgLayer, zkSync Elastic, Arbitrum Orbit, stuff like this. And so I'm still, I would say, slightly skeptical of exactly how this will fit into the overall landscape, how important this will be. We included a part of our stack, but I think just on a personal level, it's still something that I'm very confident that application level solutions and account level solutions when it comes to chain abstraction will absolutely be needed, but I'm still not 100% sold on that. So my hot take would be that maybe I'm not too sure how much that'll pan out, but we'll see. I mean, I think a lot of it's still being materialized now. So that's kind of the main, I guess, criticism or future thing that I think might happen with the chain abstraction infrastructure.
Cool. So just so I get this right, so what you're saying is these chain collectives, like you put them, essentially end up building bigger gardens, bigger walled gardens. Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, this is like a concern I've had with a little bit is like, are we just creating more fragmentation? Like, are we just creating like a group of chains here and a group of chains here? Like how will this actually affect the industry? Are we just trying to like, are these solutions like just trying to whoever can win and capture the most chains, like accrues the most value in this case? Is there really a market for that? Like, is this just like exacerbating like the entire issue that we're trying to solve here? I'm not too sure. So I think maybe it isn't. Like maybe I'm totally wrong, and like in the future they're going to be a super, super important part of the entire stack. But I haven't seen that just yet, and I think that they're all still materializing. So I hope it doesn't make the issue worse and kind of increase fragmentation. But we'll see how it goes. That's something that I'm watching very closely.
Got it. I think I saw Ovia nodding furiously. I think we should get her to serve all these chains a healthy dose of introspection.
I was going to say that, yeah, that's absolutely true. But we should also think that now the chains have to think a lot. They have to introspect on what kind of novelty they're bringing in, and why they're really needed.
Yeah.
Will actually build on them. So I think if we have a really good established chain abstraction solution, the number of chains that are getting spun up might also kind of decline a little bit. I'm not going to say that it's going to be like a single chain survivor, but we'll kind of have a finite ecosystem. But yeah, with the exemption of dApp chains, of course. So yeah, we just have to wait and see how this. But it also doesn't make sense. So if the asset market is really dilute, then when we need interoperability as a solution, then account abstraction protocols will be heavily used. But if we see dApps getting kind of built on one particular ecosystem, then people might not need a chain abstraction solution. So that's also an angle that we need to keep track of. Right. So
understood. Got it. Euclid, did you come up with a hot take, man?
Yeah, I think NFTs will make a resurgence. And NFTs completely different to chain abstraction. I thought I'll take the topic somewhere different just to end it. But NFTs to make a resurgence, and not in the meme form that we know them all, but hopefully, fingers crossed, actual NFTs with real utility behind them, such as transportations of logistics goods and providing evidence of where this good or service has come from, and people scanning a QR code and a digital representation of physical goods essentially in NFT form. Hopefully that comes in the next few years.
Fantastic. Guys, you heard here first. NFTs are going to be back. On that note, on that rather positive note, I thank you all for making the time. We're a little over time, but it's been a fantastic conversation. Would love to have you guys back probably in a couple of weeks, in a few months perhaps, and we reassess what's been happening, and we see where we're headed from there. But thank you all. Fantastic talking to you. Please take care. Have a great one.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right.